5v5 role queue is the best overall iteration of the game, the one that works best for the player base we have, not the imaginary player base that a lot of 6v6ers thinks exists. Any 6v6 mode that allows 3 of a role will end up being 3 tanks if you want to win. Any 6v6 mode that requires 2 tanks will explode non-tank queues because nobody wants to play main tank, they only want to play off tank. If the mode somehow gets rid of the idea of main tank, making all tanks off tanks, then it'll make DPS role useless. Why play a DPS when you can just play a fat DPS in the form of a tank, or a self-healing DPS in the form of a support? If you homogenize all the heroes so that tanks are slightly more tanky and supports slightly for healy, you get deathmatch, which ruins what makes Overwatch special. Now, this is one of the worst takes I've ever heard, so let's dismantle it in a couple of minutes. So, let's talk about that imaginary player base, shall we? So, the idea that 6v6 would, or it does have an imaginary player base attached to it and is not necessarily a realistic idea or perception of what the player base wants out of the game is actually ridiculous. So we had Overwatch 1 for 6 years. About 3 of those years we had some of the worst balance and a lack of content that I had ever seen. I absolutely agree with the 5v5 players about that. That ending period of Overwatch was not very good. However, saying that 6v6ers are an imaginary player base is kind of insane and doesn't make any sense. I mean, look at the 6v6 Discord where people are balancing the game and playing a 6v6 version of it to this day in the Discord, and it is immensely popular where the games are basically full all the time and they need constant help to manage how many people want to play it. I think that's kind of point enough to show that people do want to play 6v6. However, if you're going for the argument that the casual player base prefers 5v5 over to 6v6, then please refer to my Casuals Love Complexity video where I go over that and prove it completely wrong. However, I'll explain a little bit in this video so that you don't need to go and watch that. Basically, my idea is that casual players tend to prefer competitive design due to the fact that casual design is downright bad for the game. If something is designed for a casual player base, then it is designed with a lack of complexity and a lack of skill expression in mind. Take a hero like Lifeweaver and Moira, for example, where they are downright terribly designed, purely made for the casual or new player, and it absolutely ruins the experience of everyone. Because if you are that casual player who would say enjoys some competitive design, and you are against a casual design, then you are at a disadvantage due to the fact that they inherently need to express less skill than you for the same amount of value due to the fact that the hero itself is easier to play because it's made to be that way. Similarly to 5v5, the format is simply easier to play on paper, there is less going on, there is less to think about. If you prefer that, that's completely fair. However, this also obviously comes with a lot of trouble with the fact that the format is asymmetrical and therefore highly abusable, and the fact that the singular role, being the tank role, is then obviously asymmetrical to the rest of the roles where it needs to be twice as powerful to make up for the fact that there is only one of them. However, when you get a situation like this, you get an unbalanced mess like we've created now, where you get flavor of the month tank, you get things like counterpicking constantly, you get constant complaining, you get 5-man comps that are purely built for countering tank, of course. And what you remove is a lot of solo agency. A big idea with the 5v5 player base is that in 5v5 you can do more than you can in 6v6, because as 5v5 your impact is more meaningful because there are less players on the field to perhaps negate what you might do. This is a good argument on paper because it makes the most sense, it's basic math. In a 1v1 you obviously have more impact than if you're in a 50v50, that's just math, it makes sense. However, in a game like Overwatch, just doing the math doesn't really work and it doesn't really make a lot of sense. So let me explain why you don't have more solo impact as a 5v5 player. So, the idea that you are more impactful in 5v5 is obviously a popular one because it just simply makes sense. However, it is wrong, and I'll go over it as quickly as I can. Basically, when you have an asymmetrical team consisting of 1 tank, 2 DPS, and 2 support, you get into a situation where that 1 tank needs to be worth the value of 2 Overwatch 1 tanks. However, due to the fact that the hero design was built to be around 2 tanks and not 1 tank, you get a lot of tank heroes that are not able to do their jobs, therefore must be absolutely stat buffed into the ceiling due to the fact that their character design is not working by itself. You get even things like Queen, who to be honest does kind of work by herself but works infinitely better in 6v6 because, well, she was kind of designed for that, and she just simply works better. So, an example of this would be playing something like Monkey. Monkey kind of relies on a Zarya or a D.Va for him to go in, so the only solution to actually making him a viable tank is to stat buff him into the moon. You stat buff him into the moon, and that means you remove a large portion of the counterplay due to the fact that his stats are so high that he cannot be outplayed. He will just raw stat diff you. This is a problem in 5v5 because if you're getting raw stat gapped, well then you don't have more player agency against the tanks because you can't actually do anything to the tanks by yourself. You require your whole team to do something about it. Therefore, you actually have a lot less player agency because instead of shooting 5 available targets, you basically have 4 available targets. And those 4 available targets are simply way harder to get to than they were in 6v6, I guess, because the duels are happening far less often due to the fact that this single tank is so powerful that they're dictating the pace of the game to an unbelievable degree, therefore not allowing for certain duels to happen outside of playing certain characters like Tracer and Genji. And because you have things like Tracer and Genji in the game, they may feel more impactful because they have more chance to open themselves into a duel and actually get into a fight. However, due to the fact that more duels could potentially happen in 5v5, it means that the things getting dueled have to be stronger in order to actually take the duel because there is no more off-tank in order to help peel that duel. Therefore, you get things like Baptiste getting ultra buffed, Brick getting ultra buffed, Carry getting put in the game that's just downright ludicrous and can do everything because they have to, because there is no off tank to help actually peel the duel off of them. Therefore, you get a stronger backlane, a stronger support backlane in order to help support the tank and actually take the duel by themselves. Therefore, supports just become another form of DPS, making DPS a useless role because the tank have become such unbelievable stat monsters that they have to be DPSs to be impactful because their simple space making utility no longer is very effective due to the fact of how split things are because there is no central team core anymore due to the fact that we're in 5v5 and the game is inherently more split up, and the fact that the supports now need to be ultra buffed to actually be able to take a duel due to the fact there is no off tank to help them peel. Therefore, the supports are just better DPS. They have way too much survivability, damage healing, mobility, things like this, but because there is no off tank, they have to. Therefore, you get to an inherently unbalanced game where the game does not work in the format due to the fact that the roles need to inherently be more generalized and do everything because of the fact there is less team cohesion and a smaller team core due to the fact there is 5v5, which makes an inherently less competitive game, which is a less complex game, which is a worse game. There is a reason 6v6 was as popular as it was, and it was because it was a superior format that made it so you could be solo impactful on any hero in the game, but also working as a team was a viable option, whereas in 5v5 it is far less inclining for you to work as a team due to the fact that your overall impact as a team is less important because the team core in the tank trade is gone. That is problematic. So, we're now obviously going to be addressing the main tank versus off tank dilemma where a lot of people didn't want to play main tank. This was pretty obvious why. I could make an hour-long video going over this, but honestly, I don't care enough. Basically, a lot of the reason that a lot of people didn't play main tank is because main tanks didn't have a lot of option when it came to hero selection, and obviously their characters typically were pretty bad and were not very fun when they purely relied on their supports actually picking the correct thing. For example, you pick Monkey on Dorado, well, good luck, you have Mercy Zen. You fucking lost. Guess you're playing a bunker comp now, or a super mega poke comp that you don't get to play your favorite hero because it's purely dictated by what supports you had, which made playing tank absolutely fucking miserable. You had no options for hero play where you couldn't really pick whatever you wanted because you had to pick what your supports could actually deal with, and you also had to pick a hero that worked on the map. Well, turns out that when you have about 4 main tanks and all of them do something else, and I don't know, maybe the meta is we're playing Zenyatta and fucking Baptiste or something, then it's like, well, I guess I'm playing Poke every day, which means I guess I'm playing Orisa every day, because there's no other option outside of that, which is a bit similar to 5v5, where absolutely fucking everyone despises the flavor of the month tank that you have to play. However, in 6v6, this of course would not be an option, or would not be a problem, I mean, if you just added more tanks that were actually enjoyable to the game, and actually gave main tanks a lot more options, like you gave the DPS players who had like 15 heroes to choose from, whereas main tanks had 4, and the off tanks probably had like 4 as well, meaning you basically could not play the game outside of picking exactly what your supports wanted, because there was no Venn diagram or overlap between the tanks, meaning that if your tank was slightly skewed, or your comp was slightly skewed in the direction of one thing and another thing, well, have fun playing that thing that you have to play, otherwise your hero just doesn't work. Now, another thing for this is that only applies to like the GM player base. That doesn't apply to the gold players or things like that, because the gold players aren't good enough at the game for it to even matter. Your team composition is literally fucking irrelevant in Overwatch 1 until you're like Masters. And even then, you can still one-trick junk and shit like that and make it work, or one-trick Ryan and make it work. So, the only people that this genuinely affected was the GM players, who are good enough at the game to deal with the fact that they don't have the correct composition anyway, and therefore are still good enough at the game to where it's irrelevant, and the gold players were so bad at the game where it obviously didn't matter anyway because they weren't playing any of the compositions properly, therefore it didn't really fucking matter what you played no matter what. So this argument, outside of there aren't enough fun tanks for tank players, goes nowhere when you're actually trying to argue for the fact that there wasn't enough options for deeper complexity in the lower ranks, because no one was even playing the game to that level anyway, so the argument falls pretty flat. Basically, the way you fix it is you add more tanks to the game that are fun, and you will get a more improved tank player base, and that's it. That's literally all you had to do. So in his post, he says, if you homogenize all the heroes so the tanks are slightly more tanky and support slightly more healer, you get deathmatch, which ruins what makes Overwatch special. This is an ironic statement due to the fact that that's literally what 5v5 has done to the game, but we will address the argument in good faith. So, in 6v6, what made it special? What made the game special is you had a 6v6 ability-based team shooter where you were able to pick a variety of heroes to do whatever it was that you wanted to do, and therefore were able to have a lot of solo impact in a teamwork-based game, making it so that if you were a team player, you could have a lot of impact, or a solo player, you could have a lot of impact, so you could basically do anything that you wanted to do, and that was a viable way to win, which made Overwatch very special. You had basically an infinite level of options that you do not get in 5v5 due to the fact that it is asymmetrical and therefore out of balance just by default. Right? When you have an asymmetrical format, like I explained earlier, obviously the person that is by himself needs to be stat buffed in order to actually work effectively within the role. Otherwise, well, you get what we have now, which is Flavor of the Month tank, do-it-all supports, and useless DPS heroes. So, what did make Overwatch special? What made Overwatch special was the ability to do whatever you wanted and it still be a viable option to win the game, due to the fact there was such a deep level of complexity. There was so much understanding that came with the game that you had to know in order to perform certain things. The mechanical ability of the game was so high, the mechanical skill expression required in order to actually play a lot of the heroes effectively was so high that it meant that no matter what skill you were good at, you could turn your strength into the biggest strength on your team and solo carry the entire game on your back just by being good at what you're good at. If you're very good at working as a team, then you're able to do that. If you're very good at, say, your aim is very good, you were able to carry a game through that, mostly. Now, it obviously required things like timing and the knowledge of what cooldowns need to be gone and engagement distances and such. It required a large level of game sense and mechanical skill to do these things. However, when you enable a game mode like 5v5 that is asymmetrical by default, you get to the point where you need to remove a lot of the deep complexity of the game because the complexity no longer works because there is a more simple option. For example, in 5v5, you obviously have one tank. That one tank is going to have a weakness because they all do have a weakness. Therefore, the easiest way to win the game is no longer about what is the right team composition I should go, when should I be timing my engages, what cooldown should I be looking to force, how am I going to take this fight, what angles do I want to take, when do we want to engage, things like that. Things that are genuinely complex conversations that add a lot of depth to the game are no longer important things to ask because you go, well they have a hog, therefore we just go Ana and we anti him and shoot him, therefore we win. We don't have to give a shit about the angles or the timings or anything like that because we just shoot the fucking Roadhog. Okay, well now the hog's gone Monkey. Well then we go Bastion Reaper Diva. Okay, well now we you can't do anything anymore. The actual complexity of the game is stripped from it because there are simple options. When you have simplicity in a game like this, you remove the complexity. Not because the complexity is actually gone, but because the simplicity is too good to give up. Why would you ever deliberately do a more complex option when you have the possibility of doing something way more simple for the same amount of gain? And that is the reason why 5v5 is terrible and will always be terrible. That is why I've been debunking this argument for 2 full years now, and not a single person has come to me with anything other than Q-Time for a good reason as to why 5v5 is a superior format. Give me any argument about why 5v5 is better, and I will debunk it, because 5v5 sucks. Have a good day. Mwah. Goodbye. Goodbye.